Good morning. Well, it's morning for me. This is Wes Lawton. I am a Grief Support Services Manager for Hospice of Michigan and one of the co-facilitators of the Men Overcoming Loss Grief Support Group. And so I'm here to summarize our group from Tuesday, March 16th. We had it, and it was a good group. I enjoyed it, got some good feedback. It was covering a topic I wasn't sure if it would be super relevant to all the guys, and it probably wasn't to all the guys, but I was pleasantly surprised that most of them seemed to benefit from it. And so I hope that you will as well if you weren't able to be there. I'm trying this without my fancy virtual background. I've been told that my bedroom is actually less awkward than the virtual background, and so giving that a try, and I assume it doesn't bother anybody. But anyway, let me jump into the presentation and make the most of this video and the time that you're spending watching it. So let me share my screen. There we go. Okay. All right, so this is about getting help. And the purpose of this presentation really is to give you guys permission, if you're looking for it, to seek additional support in addition to the basic support that you may be getting, or if you're part of this group, even in addition to this group, because the group, of course, we believe it's very helpful, and the participants seem to as well. But for many guys who are going through grief or facing other challenges, it really could work best as a complement to a more primary or intensive form of support. And so this is kind of giving you an idea of what that support actually looks like in case it's something you're unfamiliar with or have never considered for yourself, and just hopefully sort of normalizing the whole thing, because we know that all these forms of support can be very helpful. And for a lot of guys, it is understandable, but also unwise to neglect getting the additional help and support that's available for you. So let me get into it here. Let's see if I can advance it. There we go. Okay, so first I just gave an overview of some ideas for non-clinical support. These are some of the more probably the more common ways of getting support. So family and friends, obviously, and never underestimate the importance of this kind of support. Let the guys know that I see this as one of the most important, I would consider a protective factor with grief. Usually the people who have a strong support network of family and friends are people who, yeah, they're going to struggle with their loss, certainly. But I rarely have to worry about them just because they have people around them who are helping them out with what they need. They can process with them and be, feel safe and vulnerable with them if they need to be, in a positive way, and all kinds of other things that provides. And on the other hand, people who have very limited family and friend support, and there are many people out there in this situation. I I feel a natural or a learned inclination to give them a little extra attention, perhaps, just because, again, that's such an important protective factor. So if you have it, do not take it for granted and make the most of it. Uh, Nobody can really do this alone in a very healthy and effective way. And so that's why we offer this group. That's why I do what I do. And that's why you should tap into your support network of family and friends. Another important and often helpful way of getting help is self-help. And this term can be kind of a loaded term, self-help, for some people. Many may sort of roll their eyes at it like it's, just a money grab or something like that. I've heard some different ideas about it. But the fact is that for many people, reading books, listening to podcasts, watching videos online, or getting a DVD or whatever, there are many people who really benefit from some of the education that they get from this. They can pick up some tools that make all the difference in their grief journey. So certainly look into that. I had a guy email me after the group and ask about a specific podcast or online video that I could recommend. And I let him know about one that I just recently heard about. I haven't even had a chance to listen to it yet myself, but I looked into it a bit. And it's an award-winning podcast. It's won multiple awards over the course of a few years. And it's just this guy interviewing, the description is interviewing funny people about death and grief. And I looked in some of the recent episodes, and there was a rapper, there was a writer, there was, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, an actress, a long list. They're just kind of normal people too, who he thinks are funny and are good communicators. And so it's these interviews, and the person who I heard about the book through, I'm sorry, the podcast, said that she laughs and cries in every episode, and so that speaks volumes to me that it is powerful and also enjoyable. It's not going to be something that just brings you down. And so again, that's called Griefcast. I don't know if I mentioned the name. The other thing that I recommended was there are a couple of people who I consider to be grief experts, if there ever was one. Alan Wolfelt is one. We use a lot of his material in our own Grief Journeys program. And then David Kessler is another one that one of our group members mentioned, who I agree is just one of the most prominent grief experts out there. He was really the protege of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose name you may or may not have heard before. And it's because of Kubler-Ross's work, largely, that hospice looks the way that it does, that that we have put as much effort and education into grief support. And so the impact of her work echoes even today in 2021. And David Kessler learned so much from her, as well as advancing her work in the years since her own death. So anyway, those are some specific suggestions. Any YouTube videos you find from Wolfelt or Kessler are probably going to be some great material, and they're great communicators. Church activities, any kind of community center or perhaps senior center, but just a community group where you can connect with people on an ongoing basis and find support, people who will be there for you, and opportunities for you to serve and be there for them. So church activities are one very common example of that, or of course other spiritual communities or non-spiritually oriented ones can be really beneficial. And then support groups. Again, we really believe in what we do. We see it making a difference in this men's group as well as in our other groups that are available. But I wanted to highlight that this really, we say it at the beginning of every group, it's not a substitute for clinical support, for working with a therapist or a therapeutic group. And I'll get into what that means a little bit later in the presentation. But the guy, Matt, our volunteer, who is another co-facilitator of the group here, he had the idea for this presentation, and he said that he has observed in his work with groups, this one as well as another one that he is highly involved with, that a lot of times guys who are involved in support groups are maybe even less likely than other men, other people, to be open to working with a therapist or getting other kinds of professional help. So that's why we have this presentation, and that's why I really want to communicate these things to you. Okay, so here are some statistics that I found about men and clinical mental health support. Only about 1/3 of people in therapy are men. And by the way, I want to preface all this by saying I don't think that men face fewer problems than others. And so it's just that we're getting clinical mental health support at a disproportionately low rate. So 72% of men diagnosed with depression get treatment. 72% of women compared to 60% of men. Not an enormous difference, but very significant. 9% of women use outpatient mental health services, such as therapy, compared to 5% of men. And those both look like low numbers, and that may be a great thing. But you can also think about the fact that they're using it at almost twice the rate. Almost twice as many women are getting psychotherapy help compared to men, even though they face about the same number of challenges. 16% of women use medication for mental health compared to 9% of men. Big difference there. And then I found this interesting, that men over 50 are more likely than their younger counterparts to get professional help. And I bounced that idea off the group, asking why. And some of the ideas were ones that I had considered, others that I hadn't. One is that as you get older, you just learn that you can't do it alone. Another thing was about stigma, unfortunately, that is still attached to getting clinical mental health support, and how as you get older, you don't care what other people think quite as much. You just do what is best, what you believe is best, regardless of what others may think of you. Another thing is that when you're younger, perhaps you are more expected to take care of things on your own, whereas as you get older, there is less pressure to get it on your own, to get help on your own. I should say to work through things on your own. Uh, perhaps in some people's minds, if you're 60 or 70, it's okay for you to get some extra help. Whereas if you're 20, 30, 40, that's not the case. Of course, all this stuff is, um, it doesn't come from anywhere legitimate. It's just sort of the cultural and societal expectations kind of stuff we talk about in this group. But it's important to name it and notice that it's not legitimate assumptions for people to make. Here are some consequences of the fact that men are not as open to getting support as perhaps they could be or should be. Men, we know, are 3.5%, I'm sorry, 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide than women. In 2015, 7 out of 10 suicides were men. We also know that men abuse drugs and alcohol at a higher rate than women. And so some of these, I'm sure there are many factors behind it, but the fact that they're not working with professional helpers, I'm sure is one of those factors. I found this interesting. My clinical supervisor to get fully licensed as a counselor, which is hopefully coming through in the next month or so. Anyway, he's a fantastic couples counselor, really the leading one in his area. And so he talks about this issue in our supervision groups. Anyway, the point is that he made the observation in his work, and again, he really knows what he's talking about, that generally if there's a male-female couple that he's working with, if the man is invested in counseling, that is almost guaranteed that they're going to make it work. And if the man is not invested, then it is a lot less likely. And that to me says not that the problem is the man, but just that the fact that men being less invested in professional help can be detrimental to relationships. I think that that's really the main point that I was trying to make with this, besides the fact that it's just interesting to me. So why aren't we open to this kind of help? And so I'm sorry, I already covered some of this, so I'll just blaze through it here. Concepts of traditional masculinity. We should be tough, we should be emotionless, talked about how we're really kind of trained from an early age to be out of touch with our feelings. And that's a big detriment to us. There's no good reason for it. Certainly some of it could be just inherent, that men tend to be less emotionally expressive. That's a possibility, but I would wager that the vast majority of the reason that we're out of touch with our feelings has to do with our society, our families, nature versus nurture, more on the nurture side, I think, when it comes to these issues. Taught to suppress feelings. Again, my observation and what I've learned is that other than anger, which men are and boys are more allowed to express than girls and women, it seems like, other feelings such as, of course, sadness, loneliness, fill in the blank, extreme happiness, guys are told to tone it down or cut it out, whereas girls are not. So high value of independence. We're the ones, as one of the guys expressed in the group, we're the ones who are supposed to solve the problems, other people's and our own. And if we have to ask for help, that is supposed to feel a little uncomfortable. And that's unfortunate because it causes problems for us. And then men, for similar reasons, may be less open to trusting other people, being vulnerable with other people, which is something that you really have to do to work through your grief and some other challenges. So this isn't a direct quote from anyone, but this kind of summarizes this idea. If it's manly to be all of these things, then getting professional help might make me less of a man. It might threaten this key part of how I see myself, and that can be very scary. So it's understandable if you've thought these things. Of course, it's been reinforced probably your whole life for many of you. And it's also understandable that you wouldn't get help because of this idea. Who wants to have their identity threatened? Nobody. We we see all kinds of conflict all around us because of people feeling their identity is threatened. So uh, it's understandable, but we're here to help you get past that for the good of yourself and the people around you. So anyway, I just wanted to reemphasize that this is, and I was going to put another word here, but I wanted to keep it professional. So this is rubbish. It's garbage. It's baseless. There's no reason to buy into this stuff if you are hurting yourself, or I should say, if you're allowing yourself to suffer needlessly. So here are some other types of professional help that can make a huge difference. I focus quite a bit on psychotherapy in this presentation, and so I wanted to really name and highlight these other ways, these other professionals who are out there who can help you through these times. Not everybody needs a therapist, that's for sure, but most people would benefit from it, especially when you're grieving. But you can also get help from clergy, your pastors, your priests, uh, whatever type of spiritual leaders you have. Maybe you come from a culture in particular where this is the go-to when it comes to seeking professional help. And boy, does it work a lot of times. There are some excellent clergy out there who can guide people through these struggles. And especially if you are a very religious person, this may be a mindset and a language that is more helpful to you than what you might consider secular professional help would be. Or maybe, it's not an either or. Maybe you work with a pastor and a counselor, or whatever it might be. Doctors, of course, and we know that people are a lot more likely to open up to their doctors about their mental health problems than they are to start seeing a therapist. And many doctors do a fantastic job of listening and guiding and referring when necessary, um, and just being there, and certainly prescribing medication, which, as I'll talk about briefly, can be a great help. And then life coaches, they use similar kinds of skills to therapists, although they're more, I would say, in general, solutions oriented. Their training isn't quite as extensive oftentimes, but it's very sufficient in many cases. Um, and again, they can be there to help you find your way. And that's what a lot of people need. Um, these are the main ones that we talked about. I don't remember any other major ones that I had missed that the guys talked about. So medication, we talked about some different perspectives on this. And my main point I was hoping to get across really was that I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who resisted getting some medical help for their depression, for their anxiety, for their mental health troubles. And when they finally, sort of hit rock bottom or got to a place where they were open to it, they told me, or I've heard from other counselors, they told them that I wish I had done this weeks ago, months ago, years ago. And so I just don't want you to be one of those people. I don't want you to jump into the medication stuff needlessly, of course, especially when it comes to grief. We know that the symptoms of grief look very, very similar to the symptoms of depression. The main difference usually is that your grief, of course, sets on around the time of your loved one's death, or perhaps their diagnosis of whatever ended up ending their life. Whereas depression, usually it was a problem before, and it's persisted or been triggered by your grief. So whether it's depression or some other mental health issue, I hope that you will not be totally closed off to getting help from medication, but also, and also, one of our guys who has a professional background in this area actually just let us know, and I have no reason to doubt him at all, that antidepressants are not addictive, period. And so that was very encouraging to me. And I'm going to be, again, more free to let people know, hey, of course, again, you don't want to put things into your body that are going to, um, that are going to have an impact on you needlessly. But it's probably not going to be needless if you're viewing this presentation. As long as if you're dealing with something other than grief. So anyway, as you can tell, I'm being kind of careful here because I'm not a doctor. I'm not a health expert, and so I hope that you won't take anything that I say as expert advice in this area, but I'm sharing based on my experiences and my observations, my working with people who are grieving. And so I want you to, again, don't totally close it off if it could be a major help for you. I'll leave it at that. Psychotherapy. So I wanted to just, again, give a basic overview of what psychotherapy is, hopefully to help it feel more normal, more comfortable, so that it's something that you will consider if it's right for you or not, if it's something that you'd be open to. So psychotherapy, or I can just use therapy as shorthand. Of course, there are other types of therapy. There's physical therapy, occupational therapy, and so on. But a lot of times when people say, going to therapy, well, I've heard that a lot for physical therapy, but psychotherapy is a big one. And so this is addressing problems that you're facing related to your thoughts and your feelings, the mind. And so there are different professionals who can provide psychotherapy. And so I will refer to the way things are in the state of Michigan. I know that there are, such as licensed marriage and family therapists, I believe, are some of the professionals out in California. And there are other types of qualifications in other states. But in Michigan, the people who can provide therapy legally are counselors, such as myself. And counselors, compared to some of these others that I will mention, are more specialized in psychotherapy, probably. There are others who are very highly qualified and who do excellent work. In some cases, some of these other professionals do better than some counselors, of course. So I don't want to paint like counselors have a corner on the market by any means. But we aren't trained in a lot of outside stuff. And so I'll give you some examples. Social workers, again, very highly trained to administer psychotherapy, but they're also trained in other areas. They're the go-to people when you want to get connected with resources in your community, when you want to talk about social systems and oftentimes families, certainly government programs. A lot of my colleagues who do my job in other parts of the state are social workers, and they're fantastic at what they do, and they have strengths that I don't have, and just because we have different types of training. Psychologists, very similar to counselors in a lot of ways. They do focus on therapy a lot. I would say compared to counselors, psychologists tend to be more focused on behaviors and assessments and more of a hard science, whereas counselors are perhaps a little more oriented toward things that you might call it a soft science. I'm not even sure that I would go that far, but it's a controversial thing. But basically, we talk about your own individual subjective experience a lot of times. Not that it's not scientific, not that we don't have very solid research to back up what we do. In fact, I'll get into that as well for a second here. But the focus is more on, for many counselors, what are your challenges? And let's do what works. Let's do what we've found works. Let's tailor it to you. Whereas psychologists tend to be more oriented toward, this is maybe more similar to a doctor, you could say. These are your symptoms, and this is sort of the treatment plan. Again, these are tendencies. I don't want to misrepresent psychologists. Some psychologists are probably closer to what I described as counselors and vice versa. And then psychiatrists who are, again, very highly trained to administer psychotherapy. The difference is that they're also medical doctors. And so they can prescribe medication. And in fact, they are really the specialists when it comes to, psychotropic medication, meds that are going to help you with your mental health problems. And so if you would like therapy and medication, psychiatrists, I think, would really be the specialists to see. Of course, there are other ways of doing it. You could work with perhaps a counselor or a social worker plus your doctor, or whatever. There are different ways of making it work. But I guess my point was, though, that any of these people are going to be very qualified to be a psychotherapist. Just wanted to give you an idea of what the kinds of training is. But they are all, if they're practicing, unless they indicate that they are otherwise, they really can't call themselves a therapist unless they have at least a master's level training in addition to a bunch of supervised hours. In the case of psychologists and psychiatrists, I believe that they need a doctoral level training to be considered fully licensed in their field. Basic types of therapy. I won't spend too much time on this, but I'll just pull them all up. And there are hundreds and hundreds of types of therapy. So this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some of the broader families, and I'll put it in layman's terms. Psychodynamic is, or psychoanalytic is a very similar and closely tied type of therapy. And that is perhaps the most traditional type of psychotherapy. It's the kind, Sigmund Freud is considered the father of this. When you think about lying on a couch and you've got somebody sitting behind you and you're talking really a lot about the unconscious or the subconscious in some areas, they refer to it. The idea is that we've got, like the 10% of the iceberg that is our conscious life. It's all the stuff we're aware of, thoughts and feelings that you already know about and can find. Whereas you've got the 90% underneath the water of the iceberg that is your unconscious, and that's all stuff that you're not even aware of that's going on inside you and affecting you. And I think there's a lot of validity to this idea. I incorporate it in my own work a lot of times. Not that I practice in this area specifically, but this kind of stuff's going on in my mind. Oh, subconsciously, I can see this happening. And the idea is that you bring the subconscious stuff up to the conscious, and you address it, you process it, and that can help you solve your problems. And again, there's a lot of validity. A lot of people have been helped by it. And psychodynamic types of therapy often go on for years and years, and you really dig into childhood issues, again, subconscious issues, and it's really trying to root out the problem that you're suffering from. Cognitive behavioral, or other types of cognitive and behavioral types of therapy, they focus more on what can we observe. It's a lot closer to a hard science. They're going to be giving you homework, things that you can practice. They're going to be telling you to keep journals, or you're going to be talking about replacing irrational thoughts with more rational thoughts, and you're going to be doing more role play. Pretend that I'm this person that you're having a conflict with. Let's talk this through. And so it's more oriented in that way. And then the humanistic family, I forgot on Tuesday night about Gestalt, but that's more about, compared to some of the others, about what's going on in the present moment. And, role play is a big part of that as well. Oh my gosh, it'll come back to me, because there's one other important aspect to it that I forgot on Tuesday, and I had it and then it left me. Obviously, this is a type of therapy that I haven't really practiced and am a little bit less familiar with. Compared to person-centered, this is probably the core of the way that I think about, and not that I practice as a therapist, but the way that I think about my work as a grief support services manager in my counseling work. And this is about how, you are the expert of your own life, and I'm here to sort of be hopefully a mirror for you and help you see more clearly what's going on in your own life. And so we might reflect back to you what you say, what you're feeling, trying to be very empathetic, trying to be very genuine in our relationships with you. And then existential is a little bit perhaps more intellectually based. Of course, existential philosophy is a big part of it, and talking about some of these concepts. So then there's integrative. These are people who pick and choose from whatever works. They're often pragmatic, and that's how I would really describe myself. I'm influenced by all this stuff, and most other therapists are as well. Again, I don't practice as a therapist in this work, even though I am licensed to do so, but it's an important part of what I do. And the main thing that I wanted to say is that if psychological and counseling and all this type of research, if it's shown anything consistently, the number one thing is that it helps. If you look at outcomes, if you look at people who go and work with a psychotherapist, they are very likely to say that helps me. And as far as the steps to get there, as far as specifically, like again, referring to more of like a doctor, like this kind of treatment helps this kind of problem. Regardless of all that stuff, therapy helps. And then the number two thing is that this may surprise many people, including, I think, people who are professionals, is that all of these types of therapy are about equally effective when it comes to outcomes. Uh, so, um, of course, some are going to be more effective with certain types of problems. If you're having, if you have a phobia, you probably want to see somebody who's more cognitive behavioral. Um, if you're working through trauma, somebody who practices EMDR, that's going to be very effective. Although, again, any of these types of therapy could be extremely helpful with any of those issues. So, as you're looking for a therapist, just keep that in mind. If you hear about any of these types of therapy or any others, just understand that almost every type of therapy is going to be able to address almost every type of problem. Again, there are professionals out there who would disagree with me, but I think the research really supports what I'm saying. Finding a therapist. So one of the main ways and most effective ways is to talk to your insurance provider. And that includes Medicare and Medicaid, by the way. And they can help you find somebody who they can help cover who's in your area. And a lot of times people, they'll point you towards someone who they have positive experiences with, they've gotten good feedback from. So that's a very simple way to do it a lot of times, assuming that you have some kind of insurance. And just addressing payment in general, most therapists that that I'm aware of in Michigan, their full price per session is around $100, and that can seem very expensive for many of us. Some are closer to 60, some are closer to 150 or even higher. Excuse me, but that is full price. Your insurance can really subsidize that. So you may have a 10 or 20 or $25 copay every time. Many insurance providers will completely cover like 10 or 20 sessions per year, usually 10, in some cases only 5. But so you can go try out a therapist and meet with them for a number of times and not pay anything in a lot of cases. So maybe talk to your insurance and see what is covered. And then the other thing is that if you can talk with your therapist and if you get to the end of what they'll pay for, the insurance will pay for, the therapist can often contact them and say, they're really benefiting, they need some more sessions, and they'll give you an extra couple, 2 or 3 sessions. So many of them only take cash as well because that allows them to operate more freely. And so if that's what you're comfortable with, you can do that too. And many operate on a sliding scale too. They may charge you more or less depending on what your income is. Word of mouth, of course. The guys talked in this group about, have you seen a therapist and what have you liked and disliked? So you can do that with your friends and family. That can be really helpful. And then online tools. One of the main ones and the one that I use most often probably when I refer people to therapists in the community is this website, psychologytoday.com. And in the group, I won't do it here, but I just showed what the website looks like and how you can search for a therapist in your area. And then you can filter on a bunch of different areas like what insurances do they take? What types of therapy do they provide? What issues do they have experience with? And so that's really helpful as well. Might take some trial and error. I wanted to let you know it's very common, I would say more often than not, for the first try to not work out. They just, they may not be a bad therapist. They just might not be a good fit for you. And that fit, we know from research, is very important. And so if it doesn't seem like it's a good fit, don't be afraid to try a second or a third therapist. I wanted to give you some of this information so that we can hopefully keep that to a minimum and you can find somebody who you can be confident is a good fit for you. But just understand again that that's normal. Don't get discouraged if it doesn't work out right away. The other thing that reminds me, by the way, about any kind of psychotropic medication is that, like other types of medication, I know pain medication is often this way. It takes around 6 weeks to really kick in and make the difference it's supposed to make. And so anyway, if you try a medication, don't jump off it if it's if it's not working within a couple of weeks or so. And of course, talk to your doctor about it. They're going to be much more of an expert on it than I could be. So how to determine if you should seek more help. These are the areas where I think you should strongly consider professional help, especially therapy and or medication. If you're suicidal, and if you're suicidal, I'm not at my office. I don't have the suicide hotline in front of me, but you can Google it and keep that somewhere where you can see it. Because those, people are going to be available to talk you through that and help protect you in the short term. Addiction, almost impossible to break an addiction to some kind of a substance without some kind of professional help. So if somebody's struggling with addiction, I would always point them toward a professional. Mental and emotional problems that inhibit your daily life. If you can't do the kinds of stuff that you need to be able to do, working, taking basic care of yourself, um, doing your basic chores that you need to do to keep your life going, strongly consider professional help. And then going through a difficult major life transition. Some of these examples here, grief being one of them. I really encourage people who are going through this kind of a season to seek professional help, to talk with a therapist, somebody who's trained to help guide you through these times. Not everybody needs it. Many people who grieve effectively never work with any kind of a therapist or any kind of a professional, and that's fine. Good for them. But many people would benefit from it and neglect to take advantage of it. Also consider it if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling more tired than usual, you got anger difficulties, anxious thoughts, feeling like nothing really matters, feeling like you're hopeless, if you're feeling socially withdrawn. These are very common symptoms of what would be considered mental health problems. And so, obviously we all get overwhelmed from time to time, but I'm talking about consistent issues that have been around for, a number of days or weeks. Certainly 6 months or more, I would really urge you to consider seeking professional help. So I'm sorry that I'm talking so fast, but there's a lot of material here, and I don't want to waste anybody's time. Some of the benefits of therapy. So these are things that you can gain from psychotherapy, even if you do not have any of these problems that I mentioned. A lot of people who don't have any what you would consider mental health problems work with a psychotherapist anyway, because it can help them increase their self-awareness, achieve their goals, whatever they might be. Your goal may not be to get out of the pit. Your goal may be to go above and beyond, and a psychotherapist is trained to help you get there. Improve your relational skills and fulfillment. A lot of therapy work is about relational skills and solving conflict and making the most of your relationships. We know that physical and mental health have a connection. And so, that can be helpful. It can even help you meet your physical health goals to some extent, even though they're not the experts on that, probably compared to, personal trainers and so on. And then just basic guidance. If you're feeling lost, you don't know where to go next with some aspect of your life, psychotherapists can help you figure out what is going to be something you can have some confidence with. So here is sort of the conclusion. Family, friends, church, self-help, life coach, doctor, therapist. We don't have to do it alone, and in fact, we shouldn't. So this applies with grief. This applies with other types of mental and emotional struggles. There's a lot of help out there. Some of it is professional, some of it is non-professional, but don't try to do it alone. Take advantage of what's out there. It will make a whole world of difference if you do. And again, my goal is to help you get comfortable with this idea and be open to seeking it. So I wish I could take your questions. This is just part of the presentation. Just to remind you, Men Overcoming Loss meets the first and third Tuesdays of each month at 6 p.m. The first Tuesday goes until about 7:30, third Tuesday till about 7:15. But the first group of each month is more support oriented. You come together, you talk about what's going on in your lives, you support each other. The third Tuesday, which is the one that I generally help facilitate, is this more educational style. And so a lot of guys do both, and I think that that can be great. A lot of guys do one or the other, or they just pop in when it works for them. But you can go to our website, hom.org. It's for Hospice of Michigan. You can click Grief Support up at the top and navigate to our groups from there and find out more about all of our groups, including Men Overcoming Loss. And I believe my email address and my number are on there, so you can get in touch with me if you'd like to, if you have any questions. Thank you for your time. Thanks for viewing this. I hope that it's helpful, as it was to many of the guys in the group. And feel free to share it if you did find it helpful, or if you know somebody who might benefit from it. So again, thank you, and please consider joining our groups in the future if you haven't yet.